The rope burned against my wrists as they dragged me deeper into the thornwood. Each step forward was another step toward death, and I could feel it in the way the trees seemed to lean inward, their skeletal branches clawing at the dying light. The pack moved around me like shadows, their human forms deceptively fragile in the twilight, but I knew what lurked beneath their skin, what they could become when the moon rose high enough. "Please," I whispered, though the word tasted like ash in my mouth. Elder Matthias didn't even glance back. His weathered hands gripped the rope tighter, pulling me forward with the mechanical precision of a man who had done this before. How many girls had walked this path? How many had begged, as I was begging now? The forest grew darker with each passing moment. Ancient oaks twisted overhead, their trunks scarred by claws and time. I stumbled over roots that seemed to shift beneath my feet, as if the very earth rejected my presence. Behind me, the younger pack members whispered prayers under their breath, not for my soul, but for their own protection. They feared this place almost as much as I did. "The vampire hasn't fed in months," someone murmured. "He'll be hungry." My stomach lurched. I tried to plant my feet, to resist, but Elder Matthias yanked the rope so hard I nearly fell. "Move, girl. The sun won't wait for your tears." The clearing appeared suddenly, a perfect circle of dead grass surrounded by towering pines. In the center stood a stone altar, its surface stained dark with decades of offerings. My legs gave out, and I collapsed to my knees on the cold earth. This was where it would end, where I would join the long line of girls who had been chosen, who had been deemed expendable for the greater good of the pack. "Every 10 years, Elder Matthias said, his voice carrying the weight of ritual. "Every 10 years, we honor the old agreement. Your sacrifice keeps him satisfied, keeps him in the deep woods where he belongs." He untied the rope from my wrists, but I didn't run. Where could I go? The pack surrounded the clearing, their eyes glowing faintly in the gathering dusk. Beyond them, the forest stretched for miles, and somewhere in its depths lurked something far worse than werewolves. Something that thirsted for human blood. Why me? I managed to ask, though I already knew the answer. No family to mourn me, no mate to claim me, no particular skills that made me valuable to the pack's survival. I was expendable. Forgettable. Elder Matthias finally looked at me, and for a moment, something almost like pity flickered in his ancient eyes. "The old ways demand a price, child, better one than all." The sun touched the horizon, painting the sky the color of fresh blood. One by one, the pack began to retreat, backing toward the tree line with their heads bowed. They wouldn't watch. They couldn't bear to witness what they had condemned me to. I was alone. The silence pressed against my eardrums like a living thing. Even the wind had died, as if the forest itself held its breath. I pulled my knees to my chest and waited for death to find me, wondering if it would hurt, wondering if he would make it quick. The stories varied. Some said he drained his victims slowly, savoring every drop. Others claimed he tore out throats with razor-sharp fangs, granting a mercifully swift end. A branch snapped somewhere in the darkness beyond the clearing. My heart hammered against my ribs as I lifted my head, scanning the wall of trees for movement. There, a shadow that didn't belong, too tall and too still to be natural. Red eyes gleamed from the depths of the forest, watching me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. He had come for his offering. The last light of day died, and with it the last of my hopes for salvation. I woke to the scent of decay and old roses. My body ached as consciousness crept back, every muscle protesting as I tried to sit up. The ground beneath me wasn't the cold earth of the clearing. It was stone, smooth and ancient, covered by a thin layer of dust that sparkled in the pale light filtering through tall windows. I blinked, trying to make sense of my surroundings, trying to remember how I had gotten here. The last thing I recalled was those red eyes in the darkness. Then, nothing. I pushed myself upright, wincing as my joints protested. The room around me was vast, with vaulted ceilings that disappeared into shadow, and walls lined with faded tapestries depicting scenes I couldn't quite make out in the dim light. Dust motes danced in the air like tiny spirits, and everything felt suspended in time, as if the world had forgotten this place existed. A castle. I was in a castle. My bare feet made no sound as I stood and moved toward the nearest window. The glass was thick and warped with age, distorting the view beyond, but I could see enough. Forests stretched in every direction, an endless sea of dark green that seemed to swallow the horizon. No roads, no signs of civilization, just wilderness and whatever horrors it contained. "You're awake." The voice came from behind me, low and surprisingly bored. I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat, and found him standing in the doorway. The vampire, my death sentence made flesh. He wasn't what I had expected. Tall, yes, with the pale skin and dark hair of legend, but there was something almost mundane about the way he leaned against the doorframe. His clothes were simple, dark trousers and a white shirt that had seen better days, no fangs gleaming in the dim light, no predatory gleam in his eyes. In fact, he looked tired. Deeply, bone-weary tired. "I thought you would sleep longer," he said, pushing off from the doorway with obvious reluctance. "Most do, after the crossing." "The crossing?" My voice came out as barely more than a whisper. He gestured vaguely toward the window, the forest, the wards, the transition between their world and mine. His gaze flicked over me with clinical detachment. "You're smaller than the last one." The last one. My stomach clenched. What happened to her? Something flickered across his features, annoyance perhaps, or frustration. She died, as they all do eventually. He moved further into the room, and I noticed he kept a careful distance between us. Though not in the way your pack imagines. "I don't understand." "Of course you don't." He ran a hand through his dark hair, messing it further. "They never tell you the truth, do they? Just fill your head with stories of monsters and blood and quick deaths." His laugh was bitter. If only it were that simple. I pressed my back against the cold glass of the window, watching him pace. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but there was nowhere to go. And something in his manner, the way he avoided looking directly at me, the way his shoulders slumped as if carrying an invisible weight, confused me. This wasn't the predator from the stories. This was something else entirely. "Why am I alive?" I asked. He stopped pacing and finally met my eyes. His were gray, not red as I remembered from the clearing. Gray and infinitely weary. "Because I don't particularly feel like killing you today." The casual way he said it sent ice through my veins. Today, as if tomorrow might bring a different answer. The others were afraid of what they didn't understand. He moved toward a chair covered in dusty velvet and sank into it with a sigh. "Your pack makes offerings because it's easier than facing the truth, easier than admitting what they've done." "What truth?" For a long moment he didn't answer, just stared at me with those tired gray eyes, as if trying to decide whether I was worth the effort of explanation. Finally he spoke, that I never asked for brides, never asked for sacrifices, never asked for any of this. He gestured around the room, encompassing the castle, the forest, the cursed existence I was now trapped in. But it's what I inherited nonetheless. The weight of his words settled over me like a shroud. I had expected death, torture, unspeakable horrors. Instead, I found myself face to face with something far more unsettling, a monster who claimed he didn't want to be one. In the gathering dusk of the castle, I began to understand that some prisons are built not of stone and iron, but of expectation and despair. 3 days passed in a haze of silence and shadow. He didn't come for me, didn't drain my blood or tear out my throat or any of the 100 horrible deaths I had imagined during those first terrifying hours. Instead, he left me alone in the vast castle, free to wander its empty corridors like a ghost haunting her own death. The place was a labyrinth of forgotten rooms and crumbling grandeur. Dust-covered furniture stood sentinel in ballrooms that hadn't seen dancing in decades. Libraries stretched floor to ceiling, with books whose spines had faded beyond reading. Kitchens with cold hearths and pantries bare of everything but cobwebs and the faint scent of herbs long dead. I found myself drawn to the windows, pressing my face against the warped glass to stare out at the forest that held me prisoner. Sometimes I caught glimpses of movement between the trees, shadows that might have been wolves or men or something worse. The pack, perhaps, making sure I stayed where they had left me, making sure their sacrifice remained sacrificed. On the third morning, I discovered the tower. The spiral staircase was narrow and treacherous, worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. Each step carried me higher, away from the suffocating weight of the castle's lower levels, toward something that felt almost like hope. At the top, a heavy wooden door stood slightly ajar, morning light spilling through the gap like liquid gold. I pushed it open and stepped into paradise. The room was alive in a way the rest of the castle wasn't. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, warming the air and chasing away the persistent chill that seemed to permeate every other corner of this place. Plants cascaded from hanging baskets and lined the windowsills. Herbs and flowers I recognized from the Pax gardens, others I had never seen before. The scent was intoxicating after days of breathing dust and decay. And there were books, not the moldering tomes of the library below, but well-tended volumes with bright covers and unbroken spines. They sat on shelves carved into the stone walls, organized with obvious care. Someone lived here. Someone who tended the plants and read the books and let the sunlight chase away the shadows. "You found my sanctuary." I spun around, heart hammering. He stood in the doorway, and for the first time since I had arrived, he didn't look tired. The sunlight caught in his dark hair and warmed his pale skin, and I realized with a start that he was beautiful. Dangerously, heartbreakingly beautiful in the way that legends warned against. "I'm sorry," I stammered, backing toward the windows. "I didn't know. I was just exploring." "It's fine." He stepped into the room, moving with fluid grace toward one of the hanging baskets. His fingers brushed against the leaves of what looked like lavender, and the plants seemed to respond to his touch, straightening and brightening as if drinking in his attention. Most of them die before they find this place. Most of them. The other offerings. The other girls who had walked the same path I had walked, who had knelt on the same altar, who had waited for death in the same clearing. "How many?" I asked. "Does it matter?" He didn't look at me, focusing instead on tending his garden. "They're gone. You're here. That's what is." "But why am I here? Why am I alive because I'm tired?" The words came out sharper than I think he intended, and he paused in his ministrations to look at me directly. "Because I'm tired of playing the monster everyone expects me to be, tired of blood and death, and the endless parade of terrified girls left on my doorstep like unwanted gifts." The bitterness in his voice was so raw it made my chest ache. I found myself taking a step toward him before I caught myself. "What's your name?" He blinked, clearly surprised by the question. "My name?" "The pack never told me. They just called you the vampire, or the creature in the woods, but you must have a name." For a long moment he didn't answer, just stared at me as if I had asked him something profound instead of something simple. "Adrian," he said finally. "My name is Adrian." Adrian. The name felt strange on my tongue, too human for someone who was supposed to be a monster. "I'm Elara." Something shifted in his expression, surprise perhaps, or recognition. "Elara," he repeated, and the way he said it made my name sound like something precious, something worth remembering. We stood there in the sun-drenched tower, surrounded by growing things and the scent of life, and for a moment I almost forgot that I was supposed to be dead. Almost forgot that he was supposed to be the thing that killed me. In a room full of life, I began to remember what it felt like to be alive. I found him in the great hall as the sun began to set, sitting alone at a table that could have seated 50. A single candle flickered before him, casting dancing shadows across his face as he stared into its flame. He looked smaller somehow, diminished by the vastness of the empty space around him. My bare feet whispered against the stone as I approached, but he didn't look up, didn't acknowledge my presence, even as I took the seat across from him. The silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken questions. "You're not what they said you were," I said finally. His lips curved in something that might have been a smile if it had held any warmth. "And what did they say I was?" "A monster. A demon, something that feeds on human blood and delights in suffering." I studied his profile in the candlelight, noting the sharp angles of his cheekbones, the way his dark lashes cast shadows across his pale skin. "They said you were ancient evil given form. Perhaps I am." "No." The word came out more forcefully than I intended. "Evil doesn't tend gardens. Evil doesn't keep books of poetry. Evil doesn't look so. So what? Lonely." That got his attention. His head snapped up, gray eyes meeting mine with an intensity that made my breath catch. For a moment, I saw something raw and unguarded in his expression, a pain so deep it seemed to echo through the empty halls around us. "You don't know what you're talking about," he said, but there was no heat in it, only weariness. "Then tell me." I leaned forward, bracing my hands on the scarred wood of the table. "Tell me what I should know. Tell me why a vampire lives alone in a crumbling castle and tends flowers like a gardener. Tell me why every girl before me is dead but I'm still breathing." He was quiet for so long I thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Because I don't drink human blood." The words hung in the air between us like a confession. I stared at him, trying to process what he had just admitted. "What?" I said, "I don't drink human blood." His jaw tightened as if saying it again caused him physical pain. "Haven't for decades, maybe longer. I've lost track of time." "But the pack says many things, most of them wrong." He stood abruptly, turning away from the table to pace toward the massive fireplace that dominated one wall. "They need a monster to blame for their guilt, something to justify what they've done." "What they've done?" He stopped pacing, his back still to me. "The curse that binds me to this place, that makes me what I am. It wasn't cast by some ancient evil. It was cast by werewolves, by your people, generations ago." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. I gripped the edge of the table, trying to steady myself. "That's impossible." "Is it?" He turned back to me, and in the flickering candlelight I caught a glimpse of fangs. Not the savage weapons of legend, but something almost delicate, almost sad. A young werewolf fell in love with a human girl. When the pack discovered their secret, they killed her. He went mad with grief, slaughtered half the pack before they could stop him. My blood turned to ice. They cursed him to never age, never die, never find peace, trapped him in these woods with an endless hunger that could never truly be satisfied. Adrian's smile was bitter as winter. "That werewolf was my grandfather. The curse was passed down through blood, as such things always are. But the offerings started as appeasement, guilt offerings to the monster they had created. But over the years, the truth became legend. Legend became myth, and myth became..." He gestured at me. "This. Innocent girls sacrificed to feed a monster that never asked to exist." The weight of revelation settled over me like a shroud. Everything I had been told, everything I had believed was built on lies. The pack hadn't been protecting themselves from an ancient evil. They had been feeding their own creation, their own guilt made manifest. "What happened to the others?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. "They died of despair, mostly. Fear, starvation when they refused to eat." His voice was clinical, detached, as if discussing the weather. "A few tried to escape and were torn apart by the wolves that guard the borders. One threw herself from the highest tower rather than face another day in this place." The casual way he recounted their fates made my stomach turn. "And you just let them?" For the first time since we'd begun talking, real emotion flashed across his features, anger, raw and bright. What was I supposed to do? Force them to live? Chain them up and feed them by hand? They were already dead the moment the pack chose them. I just provided the setting. "That's horrible." "Yes," he said simply. "It is." We stared at each other across the candlelit space, two prisoners in a cage built of other people's sins. I should have been terrified, should have been planning my escape, my revenge, my death. Anything but sitting here feeling something dangerously close to sympathy for the creature that was supposed to be my doom. Instead, I found myself asking, "What do you eat if not blood?" The question seemed to surprise him. "Fruit when I can find it. Bread when the traders still came through the valley. Nothing, mostly. The curse sustains me whether I wish it to or not." In the dying light of a candle, I began to understand that sometimes the most terrifying monsters are the ones who never wanted to be monsters at all. I waited until the deepest part of night, when even the shadows seemed to sleep. The castle had settled into its ancient rhythms of creaking wood and shifting stone, and I had learned to move through its corridors like a ghost. My bare feet found the smooth patches worn by countless others who had walked these halls before me, avoiding the loose stones that might betray my presence with their complaints. The main door loomed before me, massive and iron-bound, but unlocked. Why would it be locked? What prisoner would be foolish enough to flee into a forest full of werewolves? What offering would choose the teeth of wolves over the supposed mercy of a vampire? This one. The night air hit my skin like a blessing, cool and clean after the stifling weight of the castle. Stars wheeled overhead, brilliant and cold, showing me the path that led away from this place of grief and ghosts. I could follow it back to the clearing where it had all begun, then beyond to the lands I had known before fear and tradition had claimed me. I ran. The forest closed around me like a living thing, branches catching at my hair and clothes as I pushed deeper into the darkness. Behind me, the castle disappeared, swallowed by trees and shadow, and with each step I felt lighter, freer. The pack might have condemned me, but they couldn't keep me dead. I would find my way back to civilization, to people who might listen when I told them the truth about their monster in the woods. The howl that split the night froze my blood. I stopped running, pressing my back against the rough bark of an ancient oak and listened. Silence stretched for several heartbeats, then another howl answered the first. Closer. Much closer. They were hunting. I forced myself to move again, but more carefully now, trying to muffle the sound of my breathing. The crunch of leaves beneath my feet. The path I had been following seemed to shift and twist in the darkness. Branches that had been clear moments before now blocking my way. It was as if the forest itself conspired to keep me lost. A third howl. This one so close I could feel it vibrate in my chest. Light blazed behind me, sudden and blinding. I spun around to see Adrian approaching through the trees, a lantern in his hand and an expression of profound irritation on his face. He moved with inhuman grace, his feet barely touching the ground as he navigated the treacherous undergrowth. "Running away already?" he asked, his voice carrying clearly through the night air. "Most last at least a week before attempting something so spectacularly stupid." "Let me go." I backed away from him, deeper into the trees. "I won't tell anyone about you. I won't." Another howl, close enough that I could hear the wet sound of panting afterward. Close enough to smell the musk of fur and violence. Adrian sighed, setting the lantern down on a fallen log. "You have perhaps 30 seconds before they reach this clearing. Werewolves in their wolf form, tracking your scent through the forest they know better than their own heartbeats." He crossed his arms, studying me with those gray eyes. "I can protect you, or you can face them alone. Your choice." "The pack wouldn't." "The pack sacrificed you to a monster, girl. Do you really think they'll welcome you back with open arms when you show up alive, full of inconvenient truths about their precious traditions?" The sound of breaking branches came from my left, then my right. They were surrounding us, these hunters in the night. My people. My family. The ones who had raised me and fed me and ultimately decided I was worth less than their peace of mind. "Why?" I whispered, not sure if I was asking about the pack's betrayal or Adrian's offer of protection. "Because you asked me my name," he said simply. "Because you saw my garden and didn't recoil in disgust. Because..." He paused, something flickering across his features. "Because you're the first one who's ever asked what I eat." Red eyes gleamed from between the trees, low to the ground and moving fast. The pack had found us. Adrian stepped between me and the approaching wolves, and for the first time since I'd met him, he looked dangerous. His fangs gleamed in the lantern light, no longer delicate but sharp as razors. Power radiated from his still form like heat from a forge. "Choose quickly," he said without turning around. "Me or them, life or death, there won't be another chance." The wolves burst into the clearing like a tide of violence, silver fur and snapping jaws and eyes that burned with inhuman intelligence. I recognized the largest one, Elder Matthias, even in his wolf form, the gray around his muzzle marking him as surely as any human feature. He wasn't here to rescue me. He was here to finish what they had started. I stepped closer to Adrian, close enough to feel the unnatural coolness of his skin. "Protect me." "Gladly." The word was barely out of his mouth before he moved, faster than thought, faster than fear. He met the first wolf with his bare hands and sent it flying back into the trees with a sound like breaking wood. The second hesitated, and that hesitation cost it dearly as Adrian's claws, when had he grown claws, opened its throat in a spray of silver blood. The battle was over almost before it began. The surviving wolves melted back into the forest, carrying their wounded with them, but not before Elder Matthias fixed me with a stare that promised this wasn't finished. That one way or another, their sacrifice would be complete. Adrian turned back to me, his features already returning to their human appearance, though blood still stained his hands. "Are you hurt?" I shook my head, unable to find words. He had saved me. This creature I had feared, this monster from the stories, had stood between me and the people who were supposed to love me. Good. He picked up the lantern and started back toward the castle. We should return before they decide to try again. I followed him through the forest, no longer trying to escape, no longer sure what escape would even mean. Behind us, the howls of the pack echoed through the trees, not hunting calls now, but something else. Something that sounded almost like mourning. In the darkness between worlds, I learned that sometimes the monsters we fear most are the ones who wear familiar faces. The room he led me to was smaller than the one I had woken in, but warmer. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on walls lined with tapestries that hadn't yet faded to gray. The bed was draped in deep burgundy velvet, and thick rugs covered the cold stone floor. It felt like a sanctuary within a sanctuary. "Your hands are shaking," Adrian observed, closing the door behind us with a soft click. I looked down and realized he was right. My entire body was trembling, with cold, with shock, with the aftermath of terror and adrenaline. The pack's eyes still burned in my memory, wild and hungry and utterly without recognition. They had looked at me like prey. "Sit." He gestured toward a chair by the fire. "I'll find you something warm to drink." I wanted to protest, to tell him I didn't need his care, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I sank into the offered chair and watched as he moved around the room with quiet efficiency. From a cabinet I hadn't noticed, he produced a bottle of something amber and a delicate cup that looked older than kingdoms. "What is it?" I asked as he pressed the cup into my hands. "Mead. Very old mead." He settled into the chair across from me, his own hands wrapped around a matching cup. "It was here when I inherited this place. Seems a shame to let it go to waste." The liquid burned pleasantly as it slid down my throat, spreading warmth through my chest and limbs. Gradually the shaking subsided, though the memory of red eyes and snapping jaws remained vivid behind my closed lids. "You fought them," I said. "I defended what was mine." The casual possessiveness in his voice should have frightened me. Instead, it sent an unexpected thrill through my veins. "Yours?" He was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. "Poor choice of words," he said finally. "You're not property to be owned, but you are under my protection now, and I don't give that lightly." "Why?" "Why what?" "Why protect me? Why care what happens to one more sacrificial offering?" I leaned forward in my chair, studying his profile in the firelight. "You said the others died and you let them. What makes me different?" Adrian's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "You're not different, you're just here." But there was something in the way he said it, something in the careful control of his voice, that made me think he was lying. To me, or to himself. I wasn't sure which. "Tell me about this place," I said, changing the subject. "How long have you lived here?" "Lived?" His laugh was hollow. "I wouldn't call this living, existing perhaps, enduring." He took a sip from his cup, and I caught a glimpse of fangs as he swallowed. 60 years, give or take. Time moves strangely when you're cursed. 60 years alone. Not entirely alone. There have been the offerings after all. The bitterness was back in his voice. Brief interruptions in the solitude. How many? 6 before you. 7 if you count the first. His gray eyes found mine across the flickering light. She lasted the longest, almost 3 months before the isolation drove her mad. The weight of that admission settled between us. 3 months. 90 days of this strange half-life, trapped between a monster and the people who had condemned her to him. I tried to imagine it, the slow erosion of hope, the gradual understanding that rescue would never come, that death might be a mercy compared to this endless purgatory. What was her name? Does it matter? It matters to me. He was quiet for so long I thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than I had ever heard it. "Isabel. Her name was Isabel. What happened to her? She tried to escape, like you did tonight, made it further than most, almost to the edge of the forest before the wolves found her." His hands tightened around his cup. I was too late to save her. The pain in his voice was raw, immediate, as if the loss had happened yesterday instead of decades ago. I found myself leaning closer, drawn by something I couldn't name. You cared about her. He stopped, seeming to struggle with the words. She was kind. Even at the end, when the madness took her, she was kind. She deserved better than what I could give her. What could you give her? He looked up at me then, and in his gray eyes I saw loneliness so profound it took my breath away. Nothing. I could give her nothing but this crumbling castle and my cursed existence. No future, no children, no life worth living. Just endless nights and the slowly dying hope that somehow, someday, things might be different. The mead had made me bold, or perhaps it was simply the firelight and the intimacy of shared secrets. I reached across the space between our chairs and touched his hand. His skin was cool beneath my fingers, but not cold, not dead. You gave her protection, I said. You gave her care. You gave her someone who remembered her name. He stared down at our joined hands for a long moment. It wasn't enough. Maybe it was more than she had before. Something shifted in his expression, surprise perhaps, or recognition. His thumb moved across my knuckles, a whisper of contact that sent heat spiraling through my chest. You should sleep, he said. But he didn't pull his hand away. Tomorrow I'll show you more of the castle. The safe places, the ones where the loneliness doesn't press so close. I should have withdrawn my hand, should have thanked him politely and retired to whatever bedroom he had prepared for me. Instead, I found myself asking, will you stay? Just until I fall asleep? The request hung in the air between us, loaded with implications neither of us was ready to acknowledge. For a moment I thought he would refuse. Then he nodded, settling back in his chair without breaking our tentative contact. Just until you sleep, he agreed. In the space between firelight and shadow, I discovered that loneliness shared is somehow less than loneliness born alone. I found the portrait 3 days later, hidden away in a corridor I had somehow missed in all my wandering. The hall was narrower than the others, lined with paintings whose subjects watched me with eyes that seemed to follow my movement through the dusty air. Most were too darkened by age to make out clearly, but this one stopped me cold. She had my face. Not exactly, but close enough to make my breath catch in my throat. The same dark hair, though hers was elaborately arranged with pearls and ribbons. The same green eyes, though hers held a sadness that seemed to echo through the centuries. She wore a gown of midnight blue velvet that would have cost more than my family saw in a lifetime, and around her throat lay a necklace of stones that caught light even in the painted darkness. But it was her expression that made my hands shake as I reached toward the gilded frame. She looked defeated, beautiful and ethereal, and utterly, completely defeated, as if something inside her had already died, even as the artist captured her likeness for posterity. Remarkable resemblance, isn't it? I spun around to find Adrian standing at the mouth of the corridor, watching me with an unreadable expression. He moved closer, his footsteps silent on the stone floor, until he stood beside me facing the portrait. Who is she? I whispered, though I wasn't sure why I was whispering. Lady Katherine Ashworth. She lived here once, before the curse, before. He gestured vaguely at the empty air. Before everything fell apart. She looks like me. Yes. His voice was carefully neutral. She does. Is that why? I stopped, not sure how to finish the question. Is that why you saved me? Is that why you're being kind? Is that why you look at me sometimes like you're seeing a ghost? No, he said, understanding anyway. It's not why. But something in his tone made me think he was lying again. Or perhaps lying wasn't the right word. Perhaps he was simply telling himself a truth he needed to believe. Tell me about her, I said. Adrian was quiet for a long moment, his gray eyes fixed on the painted face that could have been my sister, my cousin, my reflection in a funhouse mirror. She was supposed to marry my grandfather, he said finally. Before the curse, before he became what he became. They were in love, or so the stories say. My stomach dropped. She was the human girl, the one the pack killed. The very same, his jaw tightened. Though the portrait was painted after her death, from memory, a monument to guilt and loss. I stared up at the beautiful tragic face and felt something cold settle in my chest. That's why the pack chose me, because I look like her. Possibly. Or possibly it's just coincidence. But he didn't sound convinced. The curse has a way of drawing similar threads together, like calls to like. So I'm what? Some cosmic echo, a replacement for something that was lost a century ago? You're yourself, Adrian said firmly, turning to face me fully. Whatever resemblance you bear to Katherine, whatever forces brought you here, you are your own person. Not a ghost, not a replacement, not a symbol of anything but your own strength. The conviction in his voice surprised me. I met his gaze, searching for deception, but found only an intensity that made my pulse quicken. How can you be sure? Because Katherine never would have tried to escape into a wolf-infested forest. The corner of his mouth curved in what might have been a smile. Because she never asked me what I ate, or noticed my garden, or reached out to comfort a monster by firelight. Heat rose in my cheeks at the memory of touching his hand, of the way his thumb had traced across my knuckles like a promise. I'm not brave. I said, I'm just stubborn. Sometimes they're the same thing. We stood there in the narrow corridor, surrounded by the painted ghosts of a different era, and I felt something shift between us. Some barrier cracking, some wall beginning to crumble. He was looking at me like I was real, not like I was a shadow of someone else. And for the first time since arriving at this cursed place, I felt like I might actually be alive, instead of simply not dead. Why did you bring me here? I asked, to this hall, to this portrait. I didn't bring you here, you found it yourself. His expression grew thoughtful. But perhaps I wanted you to see it. To understand that this isn't the first time fate has played games with similar faces and familiar sorrows. And what am I supposed to do with that understanding? Whatever you choose. He stepped closer. Close enough that I could see the flecks of silver in his gray eyes. Close enough to catch the faint scent of winter and old roses that seemed to cling to his skin. But know that whatever choice you make, it will be yours. Not Katherine's echo, not the pack's sacrifice, not my grandfather's lost love returned from the grave. Yours. The weight of that promise, the freedom implicit in it, should have been liberating. Instead, it terrified me. I had spent so long being what others expected, the dutiful pack member, the expendable offering, the victim awaiting her fate, that the prospect of choosing my own path felt more dangerous than any monster. What if I choose wrong? I whispered. Then you'll choose again. His hand rose as if to touch my face, then stopped, hovering in the space between us. That's what living people do, Elara. They choose and fail and choose again until they find something worth keeping. My name on his lips sent warmth spiraling through my chest. Not Katherine, not girl, not the offering, Elara. Me, myself, the person I was beneath all the roles others had forced upon me. In a corridor full of ghosts, I began to understand that the most dangerous choice of all might be the choice to truly live. He led me to a room I had never seen before, hidden behind a door so narrow I might have mistaken it for a closet. Inside, the walls were lined with books, but these were different from the volumes in his tower garden. These were older, bound in cracked leather and held together with careful stitching. They smelled of secrets and sorrow. The true histories, Adrian said, running his fingers along the spine of a particularly ancient tome. Not the legends your pack tells around their fires, but the actual record of what happened. He pulled down a slim volume bound in midnight blue leather, its pages yellow with age. The writing inside was faded but legible, penned in a delicate hand that spoke of careful education and infinite sadness. Katherine's journal, he explained, setting it on the reading table with reverent care. She kept it until the very end. My hands trembled as I opened to the first page. The date was marked in the old style, more than a century past, and the words that followed made my blood run cold. They mean to kill me tomorrow. Not openly, they are too cowardly for that. But they will leave me in the deep woods when the moon is dark, and the wolves will do what wolves have always done. Marcus will not save me, cannot save me. They have convinced him I am already dead. Marcus, I whispered. Your grandfather. Read on, Adrian said quietly. I turned the pages with careful fingers, absorbing Katherine's account of the events that had led to her doom. The secret meetings with Marcus in moonlit clearings, the growing suspicion of the pack elders, The demands that she renounce him, choose a proper werewolf mate, conform to their expectations of what a pack member's bride should be. I told them I would rather die than live without love. How prophetic those words seem now. She knew, I said, looking up at Adrian. She knew what they planned to do. She knew, but she underestimated Marcus's reaction to losing her. His jaw tightened, as did they all. The journal entries grew more desperate as the pages turned. Katherine's handwriting became erratic, hurried, as if she were racing against time itself. She wrote of failed escape attempts, of Marcus's growing desperation, of the pack's increasing certainty that she was a poison in their midst that needed to be cut out. And then, on the final page, words that made my heart clench. They took me to the stone altar today. Left me for the creatures of the deep woods, just as they promised. But as I write this by moonlight, I am still alive, still breathing, still hoping that somehow Marcus will find me before. The entry ended mid-sentence. The rest of the page was blank. What happened to her? I asked, though I dreaded the answer. The wolves found her before Marcus could. Adrian's voice was carefully controlled, but I could hear the old pain beneath it. When he discovered her body the next morning, something inside him broke. He went back to the packlands and killed everyone he could find. Men, women, children. He didn't discriminate. The grief had driven him completely mad. And they cursed him for it. The survivors did, yes. Bound him to these woods with a hunger that could never be satisfied, a loneliness that would stretch through eternity. Adrian closed the journal with gentle hands. They thought it was justice, punishment for his crimes. But you don't drink blood. No. The curse evolved, I suppose, weakened over the generations. What drove my grandfather to madness drives me only to solitude. He met my eyes across the table, though sometimes I wonder if the solitude isn't worse than the hunger. I thought of those long decades he had spent alone in this crumbling castle, tending his garden and reading his books while the world moved on without him. Thought of the offerings who had come and gone, the brief flickers of companionship that had only served to emphasize the darkness when they were extinguished. The pack still sends offerings because they feel guilty, I said. Guilt and fear in equal measure. They created this curse, but they've convinced themselves it was necessary. That Marcus was a monster who needed to be contained. Adrian's laugh was bitter. And perhaps he was. By the end, grief can twist anyone into something unrecognizable. But you're not him, aren't I? He stood abruptly, moving to the narrow window that looked out over the forest. I carry his blood, his curse, his endless sentence. I live in the castle where Katherine died, surrounded by the ghosts of their failed love. How am I not simply another version of the same story? Because you chose differently, I said, rising to follow him to the window. When the pack sent me, when they gave you another Katherine to torment or treasure, you chose to be kind instead of cruel. You chose to save me instead of destroying me. Did I? His reflection in the glass looked haunted. Or am I simply prolonging the inevitable? Another offering, another loss, another reason to hate what I've become. The pain in his voice was so raw it made my chest ache. Without thinking, I reached out and touched his arm, feeling the cool strength beneath his shirt sleeve. You're not prolonging anything. You're choosing, every day, to be better than the curse that binds you. He turned to face me, and in his gray eyes I saw a war between hope and despair. What if it's not enough? What if kindness is just another form of cruelty when the ending is always the same? Then maybe, I said, my heart hammering against my ribs, we write a different ending. The words hung in the air between us, loaded with possibilities neither of us dared name. For a moment I thought he might step closer, might close the distance that separated us. Instead, he turned back to the window, his shoulders tense with unspoken longing. In a room full of tragic histories, I began to understand that the most dangerous thing of all might be hope. The sound that woke me was not quite human. It started as a low growl, rising in pitch until it became something between a roar and a scream. I bolted upright in the unfamiliar bed, heart hammering as the echo died away through the castle's stone corridors. Outside my window, the forest was silver with moonlight, beautiful and terrible in equal measure. Another sound, breaking glass, the crash of something heavy hitting stone. Then silence, thick and ominous. I slipped from the warmth of my bed, bare feet silent on the cold floor, as I crept toward the door. The corridor beyond was empty, lit only by moonbeams streaming through tall windows, but I could smell something sharp and metallic in the air. Something that made my stomach clench with primitive fear. Blood. I followed the scent through passages I was only beginning to know, downstairs worn smooth by centuries of footsteps, toward the great hall where Adrian and I had shared our first real conversation. The massive doors stood open, and beyond them, chaos. Furniture lay overturned and splintered. Tapestries hung in shreds from the walls. In the center of it all, Adrian crouched over the body of something that had once been a wolf but was now mostly crimson ruin. His white shirt was torn and stained, his dark hair wild, his hands ended in claws longer than any human should be. He looked up at my approach, and for a moment I saw him as the pack had always described him, a monster with red-rimmed eyes and fangs dripping silver blood. Dangerous, deadly, beautiful in the way that sharp things are beautiful. "Don't come any closer," he said, his voice rough with exertion and something else. Pain, perhaps. Not until I'm myself again. But I could see the wounds now, deep gashes across his chest, punctures in his shoulder where fangs had found their mark. He was bleeding, that same silver that stained his claws, and something in my chest twisted at the sight. "You're hurt. I'll heal." He straightened slowly, and I watched his claws retract until his hands looked human again. Almost human. It was a scout. Young and stupid and probably hoping to prove himself by bringing back your head. The casual way he said it made my knees weak. My head? The pack isn't content to wait for time and despair to claim you. They want proof of your death. His gray eyes found mine across the ruined hall. They want to be sure their sacrifice was completed. I stared at the torn body of the wolf, at the silver blood pooling beneath it, and felt something cold settle in my chest. How many more will come? As many as it takes. Adrian moved toward me, and though his claws were gone, there was still something predatory in the way he carried himself. Something that reminded me he wasn't human, no matter how gentle his touch or kind his words. They won't stop until they're satisfied you're truly dead. Then maybe I should be. The words came out before I could stop them, born of exhaustion and fear, and the slowly dawning realization that I would never be free of this. That nowhere I went, no life I tried to build, would be safe from the pack's need to see their offering properly completed. Don't. The word came out sharper than Adrian had probably intended. He stopped in front of me, close enough that I could see the flecks of silver in his gray eyes, close enough to catch the scent of winter roses beneath the copper tang of blood. Don't give them that victory. What victory is there in living like this, trapped between your protection and their pursuit, never free, never safe? Free? Something flickered across his features, anger, perhaps, or recognition. You think any of us are free? You think I chose this existence, this castle, this endless sentence of watching everything I might care about wither and die? That's different. How? He stepped closer, and I could see the wounds on his chest beginning to close, pale skin knitting itself back together with inhuman speed. How is your trap any different from mine? At least you still have choices to make. What choices? The words came out as a desperate whisper. Stay here and slowly go mad like all the others? Try to run and get torn apart by wolves? Those aren't choices, they're just different ways to die. Then choose to live. His hands rose to frame my face, fingers cool against my flushed cheeks. Not survive, not endure, not simply refuse to die, choose to live, choose to matter, choose to be more than their guilt offering or my cursed companion. I don't know how, neither do I. His thumb traced the line of my cheekbone, and I felt something spark beneath my skin at the contact, but maybe we can figure it out together. The promise in his words, the raw honesty of them, made my chest tight with unnamed emotion. I looked up into his gray eyes and saw not the monster from the stories, but someone as trapped and desperate as I was. Someone who had been alone for so long he had forgotten what it meant to hope for anything beyond mere existence. You killed for me tonight, I whispered. I would kill 1,000 for you. The words should have terrified me. Instead, they sent heat spiraling through my veins like the finest wine. I would burn down the entire forest if it meant keeping you safe. Why? Because, he stopped, seeming to struggle with words that wanted to be spoken, but had been held back too long. Because when you look at me, you don't see a monster. You see someone worth saving. You are worth saving. Am I? His hands slipped down to rest on my shoulders, and I could feel the barely leashed strength in his grip. Even when I have claws? Even when I spill blood to protect what I claim as mine? The possessiveness in his voice should have frightened me. Instead, it made me bold. I reached up to touch the torn fabric of his shirt, my fingers finding the warm skin beneath. His wounds had healed completely, leaving only faint silver scars that looked like they had been there for years. Especially then, I said. In a hall painted with violence and silver blood, I learned that sometimes salvation comes with claws and fangs, and the willingness to kill for what you love. The wounds had healed, but the blood remained. I found him in his tower sanctuary the next morning, sitting among his carefully tended plants with his ruined shirt discarded on the floor beside him. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, warming his pale skin and catching the silver scars that marked where the wolf's fangs had found their mark. They looked like lightning across his chest, beautiful and terrible in equal measure. You should be resting, I said, settling beside him on the stone bench he had carved among the hanging gardens. I don't need rest, not the way you do. His voice was carefully neutral, but I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands gripped the edge of the bench as if anchoring himself. The curse has its advantages, I suppose, and its disadvantages. Yes. He was quiet for a moment, staring out at the forest that held us both prisoner. The healing is fast, but the memory of pain lingers. Sometimes I think it would be kinder to simply stay broken. The raw honesty in his admission made my chest ache. Without thinking, I reached out to trace one of the silver scars across his shoulder, feeling the raised texture of supernatural healing beneath my fingertips. He went absolutely still at my touch, not even breathing. Does it hurt? I asked. Not anymore. His voice was rougher than usual, strained. But your touch hurts, burns. He turned to look at me, and in his gray eyes I saw something that made my pulse quicken. But not the way pain burns, the way wanting something burns. My hand stilled on his shoulder, palm pressed flat against the warm skin. Adrian. I know. He covered my hand with his, cool fingers threading through mine. I know this is madness. I know you're trapped here, that I'm your protector by necessity, rather than choice. I know I have no right to want. What do you want? The question hung in the air between us, loaded with possibilities that terrified and thrilled me in equal measure. For a long moment, he didn't answer, just stared at our joined hands as if they were some impossible miracle. You, he said finally, so quietly I almost didn't hear him. I want you to stay, not because you have nowhere else to go, but because you choose to. I want to wake up every morning and know that you're here by your own will, not because of some cursed obligation or tragic circumstance. And, his laugh was shaky, uncertain, and I want to touch you without wondering if it's wrong. Want to kiss you without thinking about Katherine or the curse, or all the reasons why caring for you is the cruelest thing I could do to either of us. The admission hung in the sunlit air like a confession. I could feel his pulse beneath my palm, faster than it should be for someone who claimed not to need rest, not to feel things the way humans did. Whatever he was, whatever the curse had made him, his heart still beat with want and fear and desperate hope. Show me, I whispered. Elara. Show me what you want. His control shattered like glass. He turned toward me on the bench, free hand rising to cup my face with trembling fingers. For a moment he just looked at me, as if memorizing every detail, as if this might be the last time he would allow himself such closeness. Then his thumb traced the line of my lower lip, and I felt heat spiral through my chest like liquid fire. You're so warm, he murmured, wonder coloring his voice. I had forgotten what warmth felt like. I leaned into his touch, pressing a soft kiss to the pad of his thumb. He made a sound low in his throat, something between a growl and a sigh, and I felt answering heat pool in my belly. Your skin tastes like sunlight, he said, thumb still tracing my mouth. Like everything I've been denied for 60 years. Then take it. The words came out breathier than I intended. Take what you want. His eyes darkened, pupils dilating until only a rim of gray remained. If I start, I won't want to stop. Then don't stop. He kissed me. It was nothing like the rough, demanding kisses I had imagined from the monster in the stories. His lips were soft against mine, careful, reverent, as if I might break beneath too much pressure. His hand in my hair was gentle, his arm around my waist protective rather than possessive. He kissed me like I was precious, like I was chosen rather than sacrificed. But beneath the careful control, I could feel the hunger. The need that had been building since the night he saved me from the wolves, since the moment I had asked his name and seen him as more than the sum of his curse. It hummed in the tension of his muscles, the catch of his breath, the way his fangs grazed my lower lip so lightly I might have imagined it. When we broke apart, we were both breathing hard. His forehead rested against mine, and I could see the war playing out behind his eyes. Want and restraint, hope and fear, the desperate need to claim, and the equally desperate fear of losing. I love you, he said, the words tumbling out like a confession torn from his chest. I know it's impossible. I know it's selfish. I know it's probably just another form of the curse finding new ways to torment us both. But I love you. The words hit me like a physical blow, stealing my breath and making my heart stutter against my ribs. Not because they were unexpected. I had felt the pull between us growing stronger each day, had seen the way he looked at me when he thought I wasn't watching. But because hearing them spoken aloud made them real in a way that terrified me. Adrian, you don't have to say it back. His hand tightened in my hair, as if he could hold on to this moment, this honesty, this brief glimpse of what might be possible. I just needed you to know. Before whatever comes next, I needed you to know that you are loved. In a tower full of growing things, I discovered that the most dangerous seeds are the ones that take root in willing hearts. 3 days passed in a haze of stolen moments and careful distance. Adrian had retreated into himself after his confession, maintaining the polite courtesy of a host while carefully avoiding anything that might lead to another moment of weakness. He brought me books and tea, showed me hidden passages and forgotten rooms, spoke to me of histories and legends, and everything except the words that hung between us like an unfinished symphony. I love you. The memory of his voice saying those words, raw and desperate in the sunlit tower, haunted my dreams and followed me through my waking hours. I found myself watching him when he thought I wasn't looking, cataloging the way shadows played across his features, the grace with which he moved through the castle that was both his kingdom and his prison. On the 4th night, I found him in the library. He sat before the massive fireplace, a book forgotten in his lap as he stared into the dancing flames. The light painted his pale skin gold and amber, and I could see the tension in his shoulders, the careful control that held him motionless as a statue. You're avoiding me, I said, settling into the chair across from him. I'm giving you space. He didn't look away from the fire. Time to think without the pressure of my presence, my feelings complicating things. What if I don't want space? That got his attention. His gray eyes found mine across the firelight, wary and hopeful in equal measure. Elara, what if I want you to stop treating me like I'm made of glass? What if I want you to look at me the way you did in the tower, like I'm something worth having instead of something you need to protect from yourself? You don't understand what you're asking. Then show me. I leaned forward in my chair, close enough to see the flecks of silver in his eyes, close enough to catch the scent of winter roses that always seemed to cling to his skin. Show me what I'm asking for. You're asking me to damn us both. But even as he said it, his control was wavering. I could see it in the way his hands gripped the arms of his chair, in the careful stillness that spoke of barely leashed hunger. You're asking me to take something I have no right to want. What if I'm offering it freely? The book slipped from his lap, forgotten, as he rose from his chair with fluid grace. For a moment I thought he might flee, might retreat to some distant part of the castle where he could wrestle with his demons in private. Instead, he crossed to where I sat and dropped to his knees beside my chair, bringing us to eye level. You don't know what you're offering, he said, his voice rough with want and restraint. You don't know what I am when the careful control slips, when the hunger takes over. Then show me. His hands rose to frame my face, fingers threading through my hair, with desperate gentleness. If I lose control, if I hurt you, you won't. How can you be so certain? Because you love me. The words came out with more confidence than I felt, but seeing the way they affected him, the way his breath caught, the way his pupils dilated, gave me courage. Because even when you had claws and fangs and silver blood on your hands, you were gentle. Because even in the grip of violence, you protected instead of destroyed. Elara. My name on his lips was a prayer and a warning in equal measure. Kiss me, I whispered. Kiss me like you mean it. Like you're not afraid. He did. This time there was nothing careful about it. His mouth claimed mine with a hunger that had been building for days, for weeks, for the 60 years he had spent alone in this cursed place. His fangs grazed my lower lip, sharp enough to draw a gasp but careful enough not to break skin. One hand tangled in my hair while the other pulled me closer, until I was half out of my chair and pressed against the solid warmth of his chest. I could taste the desperation on his tongue, the need that had been carefully contained, finally given freedom to burn. My hands found the soft fabric of his shirt, bunching it in my fists as he kissed me deeper, harder, like he could pour 60 years of loneliness into the space between our mouths and somehow make it bearable. When his lips left mine to trail down my throat, I felt the careful press of fangs against my pulse point. Not piercing, not taking, just tasting, as if he could sustain himself on the salt of my skin, the warmth of my blood beneath his tongue. Adrian, I gasped, and felt him shudder against me. I can hear your heart, he murmured against my neck, voice rough with wonder. It's beating so fast, like a bird trying to escape a cage. Maybe it is. He pulled back to look at me, eyes dark with hunger and something deeper. What cage? The one that says this is wrong. That says monsters and maidens don't get happy endings. I traced the line of his jaw with trembling fingers, feeling the slight roughness of stubble, the inhuman coolness of his skin. The one that says I should be afraid instead of wanting more. You should be afraid. But even as he said it, his hands were roaming over my arms, my shoulders, my face, as if he couldn't quite believe I was real. You should run from me, from this place, from whatever madness we're courting. Too late for that. I leaned into his touch, pressing a soft kiss to his palm. I'm already mad, already lost, already yours if you want me. The words hung in the air between us, an offering and a challenge. For a moment, I thought he might pull away, might retreat behind the careful walls he had built around his heart. Instead, he kissed me again, softer this time, but no less intense. Mine, he whispered against my lips, and the possessiveness in his voice sent heat spiraling through my veins. God help us both, but you're mine. In firelight and shadow, I learned that the sweetest hungers are the ones that consume us willingly. I woke to find him gone. The space beside me in the great bed was cold, the impression of his body already fading from the silk sheets. Dawn light filtered through the tall windows, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. But the warmth of the rising sun couldn't chase away the chill that settled in my chest at his absence. We hadn't crossed every line the night before. Some vestige of his control had held, some careful restraint that kept him from taking everything I had offered. But we had crossed enough. Enough to change the weight of the air between us, enough to make his retreat feel like abandonment. I found him in the tower, fully dressed and staring out at the forest with the careful stillness of someone trying very hard not to think about what they had done. He didn't turn when I entered, but I saw the way his shoulders tensed at the sound of my footsteps. You left, I said. I thought it was best. His voice was carefully neutral, all traces of the desperate hunger from the night before carefully locked away. You needed rest. That's not why you left. He was quiet for a long moment, hands gripping the windowsill with enough force that I could see the white of his knuckles. No, he said finally, it's not. I moved to stand beside him, following his gaze out over the endless green of the forest. Somewhere out there, the pack was planning, waiting, deciding how many more scouts to send, how much blood they were willing to spill to ensure their sacrifice stayed properly dead. Tell me, I said. I was losing control. The admission came out rough, reluctant. Another moment and I would have taken everything you offered and more besides. Would have marked you, claimed you, bound you to this place and this curse in ways that go deeper than mere imprisonment. Marked me how? He turned to look at me then, and in his gray eyes I saw a hunger that made my pulse quicken despite his words of warning. With teeth and blood and magic older than memory, the curse carries its own imperatives, its own needs. When I touch you, when I taste you, it whispers that you could be mine forever. That a single bite could bind your life to mine, your fate to this castle. And you're afraid of that. Terrified. His hand rose as if to touch my face, then fell back to his side. Because part of me wants it. Wants to keep you here not because you choose to stay, but because you can't leave. Wants to ensure that no matter what happens, no matter how the curse eventually ends, you'll be mine to protect and mine to lose. The raw honesty in his voice made my chest tight. I could see the war playing out behind his eyes. Love and possession, protection and control, the desperate need to keep what he had found, warring with the knowledge that keeping something against its will was just another form of destruction. What if I wanted that? I asked. You don't know what you're saying. Don't I? I stepped closer, close enough to see the flecks of silver in his eyes, close enough to catch the scent of winter roses and something darker. What if I told you that last night when you touched me, when you kissed me like you were drowning and I was air, what if I told you that I wanted you to lose control, that I wanted you to mark me, claim me, bind me to you in ways that go deeper than choice? He made a sound low in his throat, something between a growl and a sigh. Elara, what if I told you that the thought of belonging to you, of being yours in ways that can't be undone, doesn't terrify me? That it feels like coming home to a place I never knew I was looking for? Then I would tell you that you've been alone too long, trapped too long, grateful for kindness for too long to know the difference between love and Stockholm Syndrome. His voice was carefully controlled, but I could see the way his hands shook with the effort of not reaching for me. I would tell you that what you're feeling isn't real, and I would tell you that you're wrong. Before he could respond, before he could retreat behind more careful walls and protective distance, the sound of hoofbeats echoed from the courtyard below. We both turned toward the window, watching as a rider approached the castle gates at a pace that spoke of urgency. A messenger, Adrian said, tension radiating from his still form. From the pack. The rider dismounted at the gates, a young woman I recognized from the pack's outer circles. She carried something in her hands, a scroll tied with black ribbon, the formal markings of pack law evident even from this distance. What do they want? I asked, though I dreaded the answer. You. Adrian's voice was flat, emotionless. They want you back. The messenger's voice carried clearly in the morning air as she called out her formal declaration. By order of the Council of Elders, the offering known as Elara Blackwood is commanded to return to pack lands for judgment. She has 7 days to present herself, or the pack will consider her refusal an act of war against the ancient treaties. 7 days. 7 days before they would come for me with more than lone scouts and desperate young wolves. 7 days before they brought the full might of the pack against these crumbling walls and the man who had chosen to protect me. They mean to drag me back, I said, the words coming out hollow, to finish what they started. Over my dead body. The fierce certainty in Adrian's voice made me turn to look at him. Gone was the careful control, the protective distance. In its place was something that looked very much like the monster from the legends. Beautiful and terrible and utterly without mercy. Adrian. No. He turned from the window to face me fully, and I could see fangs gleaming behind his lips. They had their chance to claim you as one of their own. They chose to throw you away, to sacrifice you to their guilt and fear. They don't get to change their minds now. What if they're right? The words came out in a whisper. What if I should go back? Face whatever judgment they think I deserve. Then you'll face it here, with me beside you. He closed the distance between us in 2 strides, hands framing my face with desperate gentleness. Whatever comes, whatever they bring against us, we'll meet it together. Together? Together. He leaned down to press his forehead against mine, gray eyes burning with promises I wasn't sure either of us could keep. If they want war, they'll have it. If they want their sacrifice back, they'll have to go through me to get it. In the space between dawn and judgment, I learned that sometimes love is not a choice, but a declaration of war against the world that would keep it from flourishing. They came at sunset on the 7th day, shadows flowing between the trees like liquid darkness. I watched from the tower window as the pack emerged from the forest, not the handful of scouts we had grown accustomed to, but the full strength of their war party. Dozens of figures moved with inhuman grace through the gathering dusk, and even at this distance I could see the gleam of eyes that caught the dying light like stars. "How many?" Adrian asked from behind me, his voice carefully controlled. "Too many." I pressed my palms against the cold glass, counting shapes that seemed to multiply in the shadows. "The entire pack, I think. Everyone who can fight." "Good." The word came out with a satisfaction that should have frightened me. "Let them all come. Let them see what their guilt and cowardice have wrought." I turned to find him checking the fastenings on his armor, pieces he had retrieved from some forgotten armory, black leather and steel, that made him look like a knight from darker stories. But it was his eyes that made my breath catch. They burned with a cold fire that spoke of 60 years of solitude, finally given purpose. "You don't have to do this," I said. "I could go to them, face whatever judgment they—" "No." The word came out sharp enough to cut. "They made their choice when they left you on that altar. They don't get to unmake it now. Adrian, you are mine to protect." He crossed to where I stood, hands settling on my shoulders with gentle possessiveness. "Not because of any bite or bond or magical compulsion, but because you chose to be. Because you looked at a monster and saw something worth saving. You're not a monster. Tonight I will be." His thumb traced the line of my cheek, and I could see regret, warring with determination in his gray eyes. "Tonight I will be everything they ever said I was and worse besides. Can you live with that?" The question hung in the air between us, loaded with implications that went far beyond this single confrontation. He was asking if I could love him when the careful control slipped, when the curse showed its teeth, when necessity forced him to become the very thing he had spent decades trying not to be. "Yes," I said simply. "I can live with that." Something shifted in his expression, relief, perhaps, or gratitude. He leaned down to kiss me, soft and desperate, as if this might be the last chance for gentleness between us. "Stay in the tower," he said against my lips. "Whatever happens, whatever you see, stay here until it's over." What if it will be over? The certainty in his voice was absolute. One way or another, it will be over. He left me then, moving with fluid grace toward whatever final preparations he deemed necessary. I watched from the window as he emerged into the courtyard below, a figure of darkness and controlled violence waiting for the storm to break. They attacked at full dark. The pack flowed over the outer walls like a tide of fur and fangs, dozens of wolves moving with coordination born of lifelong training. But Adrian was ready for them. He met the first wave in the courtyard, and even from my high perch, I could see the terrible beauty of his violence. He moved like death-given form, faster than thought, stronger than stone. His claws, when had he grown claws, opened throats and bellies with surgical precision. His fangs found the spaces between vertebrae, the soft spots that dropped even werewolves in their tracks. Blood painted the ancient stones silver in the moonlight. But there were so many of them. For every wolf that fell, 2 more took its place. They swarmed him from all sides, coordinating their attacks with pack intelligence, using their numbers to overwhelm even his supernatural speed and strength. I watched in horror as claws raked across his chest, as fangs found the gaps in his armor, as the tide of violence slowly began to turn against him. That was when I stopped thinking and started moving. I ran from the tower, downstairs I had learned by heart during my weeks of captivity, through corridors that had become as familiar as breathing. I burst into the courtyard just as a massive gray wolf, Elder Matthias, even in this form I knew his scent, knocked Adrian to the ground and went for his throat. "No!" The word tore from my chest with a force that surprised me, carrying something that felt like power, like authority, like magic given voice. The attacking wolves faltered, turning toward me with eyes that reflected the moon like mirrors. "You want me?" I stepped into the blood-soaked courtyard, chin raised in defiance that felt as natural as breathing. "Here I am, your precious sacrifice, alive and unbroken and utterly unrepentant. Come and take me." Elder Matthias shifted back to human form, blood on his hands and murder in his eyes. "Gladly." But as he moved toward me, as the pack closed in for the kill they had been denied, something strange happened. The air around me began to shimmer, to bend, to taste of copper and starlight. Power flowed through my veins like liquid fire, and I realized with a shock of recognition what I was feeling. Magic. My magic. The heritage I had never known I carried. "I am not your sacrifice," I said, and my voice carried across the courtyard like thunder. "I am not your guilt offering, or your scapegoat, or your convenient victim. I am Elara Blackwood, and I claim my birthright." The words seemed to hang in the air like a spell, and for a moment, everything was perfectly still. Then the power inside me exploded outward in a wave of silver light that sent the pack stumbling backward, their wolf forms unable to maintain cohesion in the face of magic they had not expected, had not prepared for. In the sudden silence that followed, Adrian struggled to his feet, blood on his mouth and wonder in his eyes. "You're not human," he said. "No," I agreed, feeling power course through me like a river finally freed from its dam. "I'm not." In blood and moonlight, I discovered that sometimes the greatest monsters are the ones who pretend to be protectors, and the greatest magic is the kind that saves what you love. The castle burned behind us as we fled through the forest. Orange flames licked at the ancient stones, consuming tapestries and books and centuries of solitude in hungry waves. The pack had set the fire in their retreat, a final act of spite when they realized they could not reclaim what they had thrown away. Elder Matthias had called it purification, cleansing the taint of magic and monsters from the sacred woods. I called it cowardice. Adrian ran beside me, his inhuman grace keeping pace despite the wounds that had not yet fully healed. Silver blood still seeped through his torn shirt, but his gray eyes burned with something I had never seen before. Hope. Wild, desperate hope that we might actually escape this cursed place together. "Where are we going?" I gasped, lungs burning as we pushed deeper into the forest. "The border," he said. "Beyond the packlands, beyond the curse that binds me to these woods. If we can reach it." "If." "The magic you showed back there, it's powerful, but untrained, wild." He leaped over a fallen log with fluid ease, then turned back to help me across. "The pack will regroup. They'll realize what you are, what it means. They'll come for us with everything they have." What I was. The words echoed in my mind as we ran, carrying implications I was only beginning to understand. The power that had erupted from me in the courtyard hadn't felt foreign. It had felt like coming home, like finally breathing after a lifetime of holding my breath. "What am I?" I asked. "Witchborn," Adrian said simply. "Half-blood, most likely. Your mother or father carried magic in their veins, and the pack either didn't know or chose to ignore it when they selected you for sacrifice. But if they knew, they would have killed you years ago rather than risk you coming into your power." His voice was grim as we pushed through a grove of silver birches. "Magic is anathema to werewolves. It disrupts their ability to shift, weakens their pack bonds. You're not just a failed sacrifice, you're a weapon they accidentally created and then lost control of." The howls that echoed through the forest behind us seemed to confirm his words. They were coming, the pack in full pursuit, and this time they wouldn't be content with simply reclaiming their offering. This time they would be hunting something far more dangerous than a wayward girl. They would be hunting a witch. "How far to the border?" I asked, dodging low-hanging branches that seemed to reach for us with grasping fingers. "Miles yet, and they know these woods better than—" The attack came from our left, a blur of silver fur and snapping jaws that knocked Adrian off his feet before I could even cry out a warning. I spun toward the struggle, power already building in my chest, but froze when I saw what we faced. Not Elder Matthias or one of the pack warriors I recognized. This wolf was smaller, younger, with the distinctive black markings of Sarah. The name came out as a whisper. My closest friend among the pack, the girl who had braided my hair the morning they led me to the altar. She looked up at the sound of her name, human intelligence shining in wolf eyes, and I saw something that made my heart clench. Fear. Not of me, but for me. She wasn't attacking. She was trying to slow us down, to give the pack time to catch up. But her heart wasn't in it. I could see it in the way she held back, in the careful precision of claws that could have opened Adrian's throat, but instead only pinned him to the forest floor. "I'm sorry," I said, and meant it. Then I let the power flow. Silver light erupted from my hands, not the wild explosion of the courtyard, but something more controlled, more precise. It wrapped around Sarah like a gentle net, lifting her away from Adrian and setting her down several yards away with careful tenderness. She shifted back to human form, naked and shivering in the moonlight, tears streaming down her face. "Elara," she whispered, "they're going to kill you. When they catch you, they're going to." "I know." I helped Adrian to his feet, checking his wounds with hands that shook only slightly. "But they have to catch us first. You don't understand. The magic, it's changing you. I can smell it on your skin, see it in your eyes. You're not human anymore, not really. And Adrian," she looked at him with something approaching pity, "the curse is evolving too. You're bound to each other now, in ways that go deeper than choice." "What does that mean?" Adrian asked, his voice carefully controlled. "It means that if one of you dies, the other follows." Sarah's voice was flat, emotionless. "It means the pack doesn't have to kill you both, just one will do." The words hit me like a physical blow. I stared at Adrian, seeing my own shock reflected in his gray eyes. Bound. Not by the bite he had feared to give, but by something deeper, more fundamental. The magic and the curse twining together, creating something new, something that transcended the simple categories of human and monster. "How long?" I asked. "Hours, maybe days. The bond is still forming, still deciding what shape it wants to take." Sarah looked between us with something that might have been envy. "But once it's complete, you'll be two halves of the same whole, forever. And if we try to break it, you can't." Her smile was bitter as winter. "Trust me, Elara, I've seen this magic before. My grandmother carried it, back when the pack was more tolerant of such things. Once the bond takes hold, it's absolute. Death is the only thing that severs it." More howls echoed through the forest, closer now. The pack was gaining ground, drawn by scent and sound and the inexorable pull of their own guilt and rage. "Go," Sarah said, backing away into the shadows. "I'll tell them you went north. It might buy you an hour." "Sarah, go." The word came out as a snarl, power crackling around her own form. Before I change my mind and decide pack loyalty is worth more than childhood friendship. We ran. Behind us, the forest erupted in howls of frustration as the pack followed false trails and misleading scents. Ahead of us, the border called like a promise of freedom we might never reach, and between us, growing stronger with every shared breath, every synchronized heartbeat, the bond that would either save us or damn us both. In the space between pursuit and freedom, I learned that sometimes the greatest gift is also the most terrible curse. And love is the force that makes both bearable. The border was a line of standing stones older than memory, carved with symbols that hurt to look at directly. They rose from the forest floor like ancient teeth, marking the boundary between the packlands and the world beyond, between curse and freedom, between the monster they had made and the life we might claim. I could feel the magic thrumming in the stones as we approached, a resonance that made my newly awakened power sing in response. This was old magic, older than the werewolf curse, older than the grudges that had shaped our story. Magic that recognized no authority but its own ancient laws. "Are you sure about this?" Adrian asked, his voice rough with exhaustion and something deeper. The bond between us had been growing stronger as we ran, until I could feel his heartbeat in my chest, his pain bleeding through my veins. "Once we cross, there's no going back, no castle to return to, no sanctuary to offer you." "Good." I reached for his hand, twining our fingers together. "I'm tired of sanctuaries, tired of protection that comes with cages attached." He squeezed my hand, cool skin warming under my touch. "The world beyond the border, it won't understand what we are, what I am. Then we'll make them understand." I turned to face him fully, taking in the sight of him in the moonlight. Blood stained his torn shirt, silver scars marked his pale skin, and his gray eyes held depths of sorrow and hope in equal measure. He was beautiful and terrible, and completely, utterly mine. Or we'll find a place where understanding doesn't matter. Elara. The howls cut through the night like knives, much closer than they should have been. The pack had found our true trail, had seen through Sarah's misdirection. They would be here soon, and when they came, it would be with the full fury of their betrayed expectations. "They're not going to let us go," Adrian said, turning toward the sound of pursuit. "Even if we cross the border, they'll follow. Hunt us to the ends of the earth, if necessary. Then we stop running." "What?" I stepped toward the line of standing stones, feeling power rise in my blood like a tide. "I'm tired of running from people who threw me away. Tired of being their guilt offering, their convenient victim, their expendable mistake." Magic crackled around my fingers, silver and bright as starlight. "If they want a monster, I'll give them one." "You're not a monster. Neither are you." I smiled at him, feeling wild joy bubble up in my chest. "But maybe it's time we stopped apologizing for what they made us." The pack burst from the tree line like a wave of fury, dozens of wolves flowing toward us with murderous intent. Elder Matthias led them, his massive gray form radiating authority and rage. Behind him came the others, warriors and hunters and ordinary pack members, all united in their desire to see their sacrifice properly completed. They stopped just short of the standing stones, forming a half circle that blocked any retreat into the forest. Elder Matthias shifted back to human form, naked and unashamed, his weathered face twisted with righteous anger. "Enough," he said, his voice carrying the weight of pack law. "You have defied tradition, corrupted ancient treaties, and brought shame upon the bloodlines that raised you. It ends here." "Yes," I agreed, stepping forward until I stood directly between the stones. "It does." Power erupted from me like a silver sun, washing over the pack in waves that sent them stumbling backward. But this wasn't the wild explosion of the courtyard. This was controlled, precise, shaped by will, and fueled by a lifetime of suppressed rage. "I am not your sacrifice," I said, and my voice carried across the forest like thunder. "I am not your guilt offering, or your convenient scapegoat. I am the witch you tried to murder. The power you feared to acknowledge, the mistake you made when you confused weakness with worthlessness." The magic wrapped around the pack like chains, holding them frozen as I spoke words that had been building in my chest for weeks, for years, for a lifetime of being told I was expendable. "You want a monster?" I asked, letting power flow through my voice until it became something more than human. "Look in a mirror. You are the ones who sacrificed children to appease your guilt. You are the ones who create curses and then blame them on their victims. You are the ones who choose fear over understanding, tradition over compassion, convenience over truth." Elder Matthias tried to speak, to invoke some ancient law that would give his actions legitimacy, but the words died in his throat. The magic wouldn't let him lie, not here, not within the circle of the standing stones where truth was the only currency that mattered. "Go home," I said, and the command carried the weight of absolute authority. "Go home and tell your children what you did here. Tell them how you threw away one of your own and called it sacrifice. Tell them how you created the monsters you claimed to fight." The pack began to retreat, their wolf forms unable to maintain cohesion in the face of magic that stripped away pretense and left only naked truth. But Elder Matthias held his ground, human form trembling with effort as he fought against the compulsion that sought to drive him away. "This isn't over," he snarled. The old laws are what created this mess." Adrian stepped up beside me, his hand finding mine with perfect certainty. "And we're writing new ones." He kissed me then, there in the circle of ancient stones, with the pack watching and magic crackling around us like lightning. It was a claiming and a promise and a declaration of war against anyone who would try to separate us. When we broke apart, I could taste power on his tongue, feel the bond between us settling into something permanent and unbreakable. "Let them call us monsters," I said, turning back to face the retreating pack with my fingers still tangled in Adrian's. "We'll write our own legend in blood."